I once thought the worst thing that could ever happen to me was being betrayed by my husband, but I was wrong. The deepest pain came from realizing that the one who betrayed me wasn't only the man I had shared 12 years of my life with, but also the very woman who gave me life, my own mother. If someone had told me that my marriage, my family, and even the memories I once held sacred would be trampled on by the two people I loved most, I would never have believed it. But then, one fateful night changed everything, and from that moment on, I was no longer the Laura who was submissive and fragile. This is my true story, a story of betrayal, awakening, and the journey of rising from the ashes. And if you're listening to this, maybe you too are searching for a reason to be stronger. So stay until the very end, because maybe, just maybe, you'll find a piece of yourself in this story. Chapter 1. The Message in the Dark. That night, I only meant to go down to the kitchen for a glass of water before bed. The lights were off the house, silent, with nothing but the ticking of the wall clock and the glow of Jeffrey's phone, my husband's phone, lighting up on the kitchen counter. He had left it behind. Something he almost never did. I had no intention of snooping, but when the screen lit up, I accidentally caught a glimpse of a new message. Can't wait to see you tonight. Laura suspects nothing. I froze. The sender was my mother. My mind went blank. My heart pounded wildly. Never, not once had I imagined I could be thrust into a nightmare like this. Not a stranger, not some alluring secretary, but my own mother. The woman who once rocked me to sleep, the one who held me when my father died. The person I trusted more than anyone. I unlocked the phone and scrolled up through their conversation. The messages piled on endlessly innuendo laughter, plotting even whispers about me as if I were nothing more than an obstacle they needed to get rid of neatly. The first exchange between them dated back to February, Valentine's Day. The day I cooked his favorite meal, lit candles, set flowers on the table, while he was texting my mother about a hotel rendezvous by the river. I thought I was trapped in some cheap movie, but this was real life. My life. I collapsed into the kitchen chair, my chest heavy as stone. The very chair where only weeks ago Jennifer, my daughter, had spun around while helping me prepare breakfast. Now everything felt petrified. Sweet, familiar things had turned to lies, and the man I had loved for 12 years was conspiring with the woman who gave me life. I didn't cry. Strange. I thought I would. But no tears came. Only silence, and a storm of rage swelling beneath the surface. The phone buzzed again. My mother. Jeffrey, did you remember to transfer the money? Laura checked the account yesterday. Transfer money? What account? I opened Jeffrey's banking app. He had never changed the password, still Jennifer's birthday. And when the statement appeared, I nearly retched. Every month, without fail, $500 had been wired from the insurance fund, my father's legacy after his death, into some unknown account. Scrolling back, I saw it had been happening for 6 months. I remembered every call my mother had made, asking about Jeffrey, needing him to fix her dishwasher, talking finances, requesting his advice on technical things she'd never cared about before. I thought she was simply trying to be closer to her son-in-law. I even found it endearing. Now I saw it for what it was, a script, a staged act between two traitors. One I once called my husband, one I once called my mother. I scrolled further. They discussed my schedule, my hours at the dental clinic, when I would be away so they could meet. They even mocked the lasagna I'd cooked on Sunday. Sneering, laughing. I shook with fury. But beneath the pain, something else stirred. Clarity. I had spent months doubting myself, wondering if I was too sensitive, too jealous, if I had somehow lost my husband's attraction. No, I wasn't crazy. I wasn't weak. I was right. And when Jeffrey came down the stairs at midnight in that familiar way of his looking for a snack, I looked at him with different eyes. No longer the eyes of a broken wife, but of a woman who had awakened. I set his phone back exactly where he had left it and quietly went upstairs to bed. No one suspected a thing. But that night I died and was reborn. No longer the woman blinded by love. I had become someone else, a new version, strong, lucid, and ready to fight for my daughter, for myself, and for everything they had done. Chapter 2. The Role of the Perfect Wife. The next morning, I woke up early as always. The kitchen still smelled of coffee. I still made fried eggs and toast like I did every day. And Jeffrey still sat at the table scrolling through the news on his phone, as if the night before had never happened. He didn't know that only hours earlier I had uncovered the whole truth about him, about my mother, about the money he was siphoning from his daughter's inheritance to sustain a sick, treacherous affair. I placed the plate of eggs in front of him as though I were still the devoted wife. He muttered, "Thanks," without lifting his head, without meeting my eyes. I smiled, sweet as always. "Have a good day at work," I whispered, pressing the familiar kiss to his forehead, the kiss he once gave me every night. But this time, I was the one in control. Inside my mind, hundreds of plans were forming. I wouldn't scream, wouldn't cry, wouldn't fling accusations or make a scene. I refused to become the pitiful character in the story they had scripted. If Jeffrey could play the part of the perfect husband, then I could play the perfect wife. But I would be the one to rewrite the script. After dropping Jennifer off at school, I drove straight to the electronics store. I told the clerk I needed home security equipment, a polite way of describing what was really an arsenal of surveillance gear. Miniature recorders, hidden cameras, long-range lenses. I carried them home like a spy, preparing for a covert mission. I placed one recorder under the coffee table where Jeffrey usually made his evening calls. Another I tucked beneath the kitchen cabinet, right where my mother often stood during her visits. The last one I stuck inside the drawer of Jeffrey's home office desk. As for the camera, I disguised it within a potted plant on the bookshelf behind his desk, angled perfectly to capture his computer screen. That evening, Jeffrey came home with a bouquet of wild daisies from the supermarket. Flowers I had never liked. He slipped his arms around me from behind. "Just wanted to bring flowers for my wife," he whispered. I smiled. "Because I'm lucky to have such a thoughtful husband." The words tasted sweet, leaving my lips. But inside me a storm was gathering. We had dinner together. Jennifer told stories from school. Jeffrey nodded, smiled, but his eyes kept darting to the clock. I knew he was waiting for the chance to slip away, just like always. When our daughter asked Daddy, "Can you help me with my math homework?" Jeffrey quickly replied, "Not tonight, sweetheart. Tomorrow, okay?" I stifled a sigh. His script was all too familiar. After Jeffrey disappeared into his office, I waited until he thought I was fast asleep. Then quietly, I retrieved the recorder from his drawer and plugged it into my computer. His voice spilled into my headphones. They were talking about switching to a self-deleting messaging app. My mother laughed that same laugh I once found comforting and called me too naive to notice what's happening. Jeffrey sounded worried that I might be suspicious. My mother reassured him, "She trusts us completely. She'll never suspect a thing." She, not Laura. Not my daughter or my wife. Just an obstacle. I saved the recording, made 3 copies, backed it up to the cloud, and stored 2 separate USB drives in case of loss. Something inside me shifted. I was no longer the victim. I was the one in control. No one knew. No one suspected. I still smiled. I still tucked my daughter into bed each night. I still made breakfast for my husband. But behind every familiar gesture, I was building a plan no one would ever anticipate. And I would wait for the right moment, because if they could betray me with such precision, then I would answer with a silent cruelty, so perfect it would chill them to the bone. Chapter 3. The Masks of Pretenders. A week later, everything on the outside looked exactly the same, but inside me was an entirely different world. I was no longer the woman fumbling with laundry cooking meals, trying to smile, to hold together a fragile false family. I was the woman gathering evidence quietly, building a complete dossier of betrayal by the 2 people I'd once trusted most in this world. And they had no idea. Jeffrey still left dirty clothes on the floor, still texted, busy with meetings in the afternoons, still left me alone to drop off and pick up Jennifer from school. As for my mother, she still called every few days, her voice dripping with sweetness, as if she hadn't stolen my marriage and my peace. "It's me, sweetheart. I was thinking of stopping by this weekend. Will Jeffrey be free?" I nearly laughed at the sound of her voice. Free, of course he would be. I knew Jeffrey's empty hours better than anyone because I was the one arranging them. I had recorded 3 of their calls in which they discussed using fake names when booking hotels and switching to more distant meeting spots to avoid someone getting suspicious. They even laughed about me, saying I was too old-fashioned to understand technology and that checking bank accounts was a small thing, nothing to worry about. But I knew every digit in those accounts. I had printed the statements, highlighted the regular transfers to that strange, faceless name, the joint account my mother had opened with Jeffrey using my father's insurance money as their dirty little fund for a sick affair. On nights Jeffrey excused himself with overtime work, I sent Jennifer to a sleepover at her friend's house. And me, I followed him. I learned how to tail him, how to take photos in the dark, how to keep my hand steady on the shutter. I saw my mother step out of my husband's car, saw her kiss him as though I, her own daughter, had never existed, and still I did nothing. I hadn't exploded. I hadn't called to confront them. I hadn't revealed a single piece of evidence, because I knew what I needed was not just the truth, but the whole truth, and a plan smart enough that they would never escape. Jeffrey, thinking he was playing his role so well, never realized who was truly pulling the strings. One night when he wrapped his arms around me and said, "I love you," I turned to him and smiled. "I love you too." And in my mind, only one thought echoed, "Good, Jeffrey. Keep on acting." Chapter 4, The Mask Begins to Fall. I never thought I could become the kind of person who lies so well. Every morning I still brewed Jeffrey's coffee, still told him drive safe, still kissed him goodbye as though nothing had changed. Every evening I still cooked, still asked about his work, still smiled at the right moments, my performance flawless. And Jeffrey, he suspected nothing. On the contrary, he seemed more at ease than ever. Because how could a devoted, ever-yielding wife possibly be a threat? They underestimated me even more than I once underestimated myself. But that was fine. They would realize when it was already too late. I began shifting from observation to action. I created an anonymous email account, a name no one could trace back to me, one that I would use to send out the evidence later. Audio files, photographs, bank statements, each carefully stored, password protected, and backed up in 3 separate places. At that point, my mind had only one purpose: to prepare for the end. The ending that I would dictate. I planned everything. Which days Jennifer would sleep over at a friend's house. Which nights Jeffrey would stage his business meetings. Which weekends my mother would come by, acting the part of a kind grandmother. I hated involving my daughter in any part of this charade, but I had to make sure she would be nowhere near when everything exploded. Once Jennifer asked, "Mom, why does Grandma call Dad more than she calls you?" I looked at her, my heart stuttering. Then I smiled. "Grandma and Dad are just helping each other with a few things, sweetheart." I lied, and I hated it. But I hated the truth even more, at least, while it still hadn't been turned into justice. That night, when Jeffrey went out claiming he had a client dinner, I quietly followed. His car didn't head toward the city center like usual. Instead, it veered down a quiet, empty road in the suburbs. I switched off my headlights, keeping just the right distance. And then I saw my mother's car, already parked outside a small cafe near the riverfront. They walked out hand in hand like 2 illicit lovers. I didn't cry anymore. I wasn't even angry. There was only silence now, a silence sharp as a blade, as if my very mind had hardened into a cold knife. I raised my camera and snapped. Again and again, my hand steady. And then something unexpected happened. Jeffrey turned his head as though he sensed something. He glanced around, suspicion flickering in his eyes. I held my breath. But then he turned back, smiling at my mother, as if nothing in the world was amiss. They didn't know that this was the last photo capturing them still believing they were winning. I had everything I needed. Only one step remained: confrontation. But I didn't want a melodramatic soap opera style scene. I didn't want screaming tears or chaos in public. I wanted control. I wanted to look them in the eyes. When their masks fell, when they realized they had underestimated the wrong person. I wanted to see my mother's face when she finally understood that the daughter she thought was weak, malleable, easy to manipulate, was the one who would end it all. Chapter 5: The Truth That Cannot Be Denied. That evening, the house was eerily quiet. Jennifer had gone to her friends for a sleepover just as planned. Jeffrey walked in around 9 p.m., carrying a bag of takeout as though he had just come back from some company dinner. I waited until he had taken off his shoes, hung up his coat before I spoke softly. "We need to talk." Jeffrey froze for a second. His eyes darted toward the living room. The laptop was already open, documents and photographs neatly arranged into folders on the screen. The glow from it filled the room with a heavy, suffocating air. "What is it, babe?" he asked, trying to keep his voice even, but I could hear the tremor in his throat. I said nothing. Just pressed play. The first recording filled the air, his own voice laughing with my mother over the phone. "She has no idea. Laura is always predictable. Almost too easy." Jeffrey's face drained of color. One hand gripped the back of the chair. I stayed silent. Next came the photographs, him and my mother, hand in hand. Outside the cafe just nights ago. This isn't what it looks like," Jeffrey stammered. I can explain." I paused the recording, looked him dead in the eye. My voice was no longer that of the dutiful wife. It was the voice of a woman, betrayed a woman who had endured and who now held complete control. "Go ahead. Explain. I'm listening." Jeffrey swallowed hard. Sweat began to bead on his forehead. He rambled about loneliness in the marriage, about how the love had faded, about being tempted in a moment of weakness. I laughed. A short hollow sound, then I opened the next folder, evidence of the transfers. Money taken from Jennifer's tuition account month after month funneled into another account under both his and my mother's names. Was this your moment of weakness? When you and my mother drained the insurance my father left money meant for our daughter's future, Jeffrey said nothing. Silence stretched until he finally groaned. "I don't know what to do anymore. I was wrong. I really regret it." I looked at the man before me, the man who once was everything, now nothing but a hollow shell. There was nothing left to salvage, and I had already prepared myself for this. Good. Because from now on you won't have to do anything anymore. I've hired a lawyer. All of this evidence, I'll be using it in court for the divorce. I stood up, looked at him one final time. "Tomorrow, while I'm at work, you can come back and collect your things. This house has no place for you anymore." Jeffrey collapsed into the chair, speechless, and I walked out of the room without looking back. Behind me might have been destruction, but ahead of me was the beginning of something stronger: freedom. Chapter 6. In silence, I make my plan. I don't quite remember how I slept that night after Jeffrey was gone. All I know is that the next morning, the house carried a very different kind of silence. Not the stillness of loneliness, but the feeling of shedding an old rotten skin. Jennifer was still at her friend's house, and I sat alone with a cup of coffee, looking out at the front yard lighter than I had ever felt. But I knew this wasn't the end. This was only the first step in a long chain of things I needed to do for myself and for my daughter. I began to act quietly, but deliberately. First, I reached out to Sarah Mitchell, the divorce lawyer, known in the field as the she-wolf. I handed her everything: the photos, the recordings, the transfer logs, the secret accounts. Sarah went through it all, then looked at me with a sharp smile. Do you want to blow strong enough to warn them, or do you want to crush them? I didn't hesitate. I want my daughter to grow up in the truth and to be protected. Beyond that, do whatever needs to be done, Sarah nodded. Then we'll make them pay. I also began reviewing my own finances, credit, debts, bills, joint assets, savings accounts. I was no longer the naive woman who let others handle the paperwork. I opened each file, calculated each number, and for the first time in my life, I felt in control of my own future. The house laden with too many painful memories was no longer where I wanted to stay. I found a small apartment just right for the two of us, not far from Jennifer's school, with a little balcony and a warm kitchen. I went myself to inspect it, signed the lease, and packed only what mattered. I didn't bring along what used to belong to us. I only carried what belonged to me and to my daughter. A week later, I brought Jennifer home to the new place. She looked a little bewildered at first, but when she saw the room I had prepared for her, with the horse painting, she loved the star-shaped nightlight, and the pillows stacked into a fortress, Jennifer threw her arms around me. "This house is so pretty, Mommy," I smiled, holding her tight. "From now on, this is our home. Everything's going to be okay." That evening, after she fell asleep, I stepped out onto the balcony with a cup of tea and my old laptop. I began to write, not just to prepare for court, but to document this journey as a way to remind myself I had overcome each step with my own strength. I no longer felt like a victim. I was a survivor, a woman who had risen, a woman who owned her story. A voice inside me whispered, "Laura, you once lived for them. Now it's time to live for yourself." And I knew I was only just beginning. Chapter 7, the final confrontation with my mother. I thought I had prepared myself for everything, for Jeffrey, for the divorce, for starting over, but what I hadn't expected was the call from my mother just 1 week after I moved into the new apartment with Jennifer. She left a message with nothing more than, "We need to talk, Laura. As mother and daughter, I think you should hear me out." I sat frozen, staring at the phone screen, reading those words, as cold and brazen as if what she had done was nothing more than saying the wrong thing at a family dinner. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't regretful. She simply wanted to explain. I didn't reply, but I knew it was only a matter of time before she showed up. And just as I expected, she arrived at my door that Saturday afternoon while Jennifer was at her art class. I opened the door and looked at her, the woman who had once been the greatest source of strength in my life, now standing in front of me, well-dressed, carefully made up, but with unease flickering in her eyes. "You're still as beautiful as ever," she began. I said nothing, just silently stepped aside to let her in. She sat down on the sofa, her eyes roaming the small apartment, not as luxurious as the old house, but warm and truly mine. Perhaps she was comparing or regretting something. I no longer cared to guess. "I never wanted things to turn out this way," she started. "At first it was just Jeffrey confiding in me. You were busy, distant. I only wanted to comfort him." I laughed, a quiet, sharp laugh. "Comfort him by funneling money into a secret account, by traveling with your own son-in-law, using my father's insurance." She fell silent. Then, as always, she turned to blaming circumstances. "You don't understand. After your father died, I felt empty. Jeffrey cared, and you were always so busy, always so strong, as if you didn't need anyone." I stood looking her straight in the eyes. "I was strong because I had no other choice, Mother. My father gone, my husband betraying me, and the only mother I had left, stabbing me in the back. If I wasn't strong, what would become of Jennifer?" She bowed her head, tears finally spilling down. But I didn't know if it was remorse or fear at being unmasked. "Can you forgive me?" she asked, her voice breaking. I sat back down, speaking calmly. "Forgive, maybe, one day. But trust again. Never, not because I'm bitter, but because I'm a mother. And I will not let Jennifer grow up with a grandmother who once believed that sex and money outweighed blood." Silence lingered for a few moments. She nodded and stood. Then, I won't bother you anymore. That's right, I said softly. And don't bother Jennifer. I won't let her be hurt ever again. When she left, I closed the door slowly, leaned against it, and felt an unexpected lightness in my chest. I didn't feel victory. I only felt peace. Not every ending needs to be loud or dramatic. Some endings are simply the moment you choose to stop, because you know you deserve peace more than trying to mend something that has long since rotted. And with that, I officially ended the most toxic relationship of my life, the falsehood of motherhood. Chapter 8, A New Peace. I thought that, after my mother left, after I closed that final door, life would return to peace. But no, peace doesn't arrive as a gift. It is something I must learn to create every single day. And sometimes the hardest part is not forgiving others, but learning to trust myself again. One Thursday afternoon, after picking Jennifer up from her music class, I pulled the car over just to watch the sunset. For the first time in years, I felt I no longer had to rush, no longer had anything to run from. "Mom, do you ever feel sad being on your own?" Jennifer asked, her eyes shining with honesty that pierced my heart. I looked at her and answered with all the sincerity I had. "Sometimes I do, but I'm not alone, because I have you, and because I know everything I'm doing is so you can have the better life you deserve." Our new life slowly took shape, a small but tidy apartment, simple dinners filled with laughter, nights of studying together under the desk lamp. No more cold kisses from a deceitful man. No more cloying perfume clinging to the house after Jeffrey's visits with my mother. Just me and a me who was coming back to life day by day. I began rewriting my professional resume, signing up for courses in medical office management. I knew this clearly. If I wanted my daughter to attend college on my strength alone, I had to become a better version of myself. At night, when Jennifer slept soundly, I sat alone at the computer, sketching out plans for the future. No longer dependent on anyone. No longer needing anyone's promises. Just me and the belief that I could. One day after an accounting class, my professor pulled me aside. "Laura," he said, "you have organizational skills and persistence that not many people have. Have you ever thought about starting your own administrative consulting service for small clinics?" I froze. I had never truly considered it, but in that moment, the idea took root. A business of my own. A career path I chose. A future I controlled. I brought the idea home and shared it with Jennifer over dinner. "So you'll be the boss?" she asked, her eyes wide. "Yes. I'll decide my hours, my clients. And I'll be the one being paid, not the one waiting for a raise." Jennifer burst into a bright smile. "Then promise you'll hire me as your assistant. I type really fast. You know," I laughed. In that moment, I knew I wasn't just rebuilding my own life. I was planting in my daughter the belief that women can rise, can start over, can succeed, even after the world collapses around them. That was the first time I truly saw myself no longer as the victim in this story. I was the survivor, the builder, the protagonist, not the supporting role of my own life. Volume into Chapter 9, I am the one who rewrites the ending. A year later, I stood in the small garden behind my house, hands covered in soil, but my heart as light as the early spring breeze. Jennifer sat in the greenhouse, carefully tending to the tomato plants we had grown from seeds. Each plant, each row of vegetables, was a living symbol of the new life we had nurtured together. No one could ever take this piece from us again. In March, I officially graduated from the business management program, and by June, I signed my first client contract for my own medical consulting company. I named the company Second Root, because sometimes life forces you to grow new roots from the beginning. One August morning, I found an envelope in the mailbox. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Jeffrey. Inside was a check repaying the full amount he and my mother had taken from Jennifer's fund. Attached was a short note. "I know nothing can undo what I've done, but I still want to make right what I owe our daughter. I hope you and Jennifer find the happiness you deserve. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't tremble. I only smiled, gently. The kind of smile from someone who has finally stepped out of the shadows of the past. Jennifer is 11 now, bright, strong, and with her grandfather's eyes. Every time she runs to me with her report card or makes me breakfast on Sunday mornings, my heart feels full to overflowing. I lost everything, then reclaimed it piece by piece with my own 2 hands. And now I have more than I ever did, a small home, a daughter who loves and values herself, a career I am proud of, and a soul that has finally learned to forgive itself. Not long after, Jennifer and I moved into a smaller house with a white fence and a porch swing, not to escape, but to begin again completely. Jennifer calls it the House of Freedom. I don't disagree. One early autumn evening, as we sat together on the swing watching the garden lights flicker, Jennifer asked Mom, "Do you ever wish none of it had happened?" I was quiet for a moment, then answered, "If it hadn't happened, I would never have known how strong I could be. And I would never have known that with just you by my side, I already have everything." She smiled, asked nothing more. I once thought the happiest ending was being loved by someone, but I was wrong. The happiest ending is when you love yourself, live your truth, and pass that strength on to the next generation. I am no longer the betrayed wife, no longer the deceived daughter. I am Laura, a woman who once fell, once lost her way, but who rose rebuilt and created life anew from the ashes. And today, I don't need anyone to hand me a happy ending. I write it myself with my own hands and with my unwavering will. I never wished to become a hero in anyone else's eyes. I only wanted to be the hero of my own story. And if this story has touched your heart, if you've ever been betrayed, ever fallen to your knees, remember one thing: do not let what they did to you decide who you will become. I did not win through revenge. I won by living a life that is honest, strong, and free. Thank you for taking the time to listen. If you believe women deserve to tell their own stories, please subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the journeys to come. This is Scarlet Vows, and you are listening to vows that will never be forgotten.